Hello, this is my presentation on the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And this conflict has been occurring about 100 years or so, a little bit over that. But most of the violence has been within the last 70 years. And right now, there is really not an end in sight at the moment. Though the land of Israel and Palestine have been the home to various peoples of various religions and ethnicities throughout the years. The conflict that persists today is primarily political as opposed to religious, um, as it seems that neither Israel nor Palestine seem to be willing to recognize the other as a sovereign nation or to concede control or authority to the other. So, and this land is obviously really significant to Jews, Muslims, and Christians, as the origin of their faith is in the land, and they all have holy sites in Jerusalem. So that is a significant part of it. So the conflict kind of started in the 1880s when the Jewish diaspora, who had been scattered throughout the years, began emigrating back to their ancient homeland. This was in part because they began starting to be oppressed and discriminated against, mainly in Europe. And then there was also a national or a movement of Jewish nationalism called Zionism, in which they believed that Judaism was more than just a religion, it was also a nationality, and that they deserved to repossess the homeland that God had given to them. And around the same time, the Palestinians also began identifying more than just Muslims or Arabs, but they began identifying as a nation, the nation of Palestine. So after World War I, Great Britain took control of the land from the Ottoman Empire, and they made the Balfour Declaration, in which they pledged to establish a Jewish nation in Israel. However, it wasn't until 1947 that this happened. So the UN came up with this two-state partition, an Arab state that is Palestine and a Jewish state that is Israel, and Jerusalem was to remain an international zone. However, a lot of Palestinians thought that this unfairly favored Israel, and so they rejected. Israel felt that it was fair, and so they accepted the terms, but there was a lot of opposition from Palestine. However, despite this opposition in 1948, the next year, Israel was officially granted independence, and that sparked a war that lasted about 2 years called the Arab-Israeli War, in which the surrounding nations attacked Israel on behalf of Palestine. However, Israel came out on top, and they gained a lot of the land. And in that time, over 720,000 Palestinians were displaced. The next few decades were wrought with, growing tensions, a lot of different violent conflicts and clashes. There was a few attempts for peace in there, most notably the Oslo Accords, which granted Palestinian authority in their lands and called for Israel to withdraw from what was designated as the Palestinian land in the partition. So Israel withdrew from Gaza, the Gaza Strip, in 2005, and then the very next year, a militant Sunni Islamic group called Hamas won the elections in Gaza, and so they took control. They kind of separated themselves from the Palestinian Authority that is in the West Bank. And Gaza, being very extreme, many consider them a terrorist group because of their tactics. But so they have had 3 wars within 7 years against Israel. And so yeah, just constant conflict for those in that area. These are just some pictures. Top left, a lot of protesters, Palestinian protesters, will arm themselves with rocks or grenades, but they will claim to not be armed because they do not have actual firearms. The bottom picture is a group of Israeli soldiers suppressing a protester. And then the right picture is part of the border wall. So Israel constructed a wall around all of Gaza, pretty much. So they are essentially blockaded from the rest of the land. And Israel also constructed walls in a lot of the parts of West Bank, including East Jerusalem. And this picture just shows kind of the gradual loss of Palestinian territory, especially compared to what was planned in the 1947 partition. So as it stands today, like I said, Israel is no longer in Gaza, but they have put it under siege. West Bank is technically governed by the Palestinian Authority, however, they are currently occupied by Israeli forces. Many nations do recognize Palestine as a sovereign nation, but Israel and some of its allies, such as the U.S., are staunch in their denial of Palestine's statehood. And the U.S. Support of Israel was shown very notably in May of this year when the U.S. Embassy moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which caused a lot of conflict again. So currently there are over 700,000 Jews settled illegally in what is supposed to be Palestinian territories. And the main obstacles to peace that they seem unable to agree on are the status of Jerusalem, refugee rights for the Palestinian refugees, and the growing number of Jewish settlements in Palestinian lands. So as this conflict is prolonged, the humanitarian needs are ever growing. In 1948, there were about 750,000 Palestinian refugees. Today, or as of 2016, actually, there were over 5 million. And those are just the refugees who are officially registered. So it is probably safe to assume that there are many, many more Palestinians who are refugees or have been displaced that are not registered with an organization. The UNRWA, which I'll talk about in a couple of slides, they define Palestinian refugees as persons whose normal place of residence was Palestine during the period 1st June 1946 to 15th May 1948, and who lost both home and means of livelihood as a result of the 1948 conflict, as well as their descendants. So, even though a lot of people technically would not consider many of the Palestinians actual refugees because they didn't cross, national border necessarily, it's really hard to have such stringent definitions when the borders have changed so much and there are obviously millions of people who have been displaced and are in need of humanitarian aid. So many refugees, aside from Gaza and the West Bank, reside in Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and even within Israel itself. So Gaza is home to over 2 million people, and more than half of them are refugees registered with the UNRWA. This is one of the most densely populated areas where refugees live. Many people call it the largest open-air prison because they are blocked. They are blockaded. They cannot move freely in and out. And I'll talk about their specific needs on the next slide. But the UN estimates Gaza to be uninhabitable by 2020. So that's just a little over a year from now, if these conditions and if the conflict continue. And the West Bank, it's a larger land area. It is home to about 3 million Palestinians. However, only 800,000 of those are registered refugees. Um, and the West Bank, as I said, is Palestinian, governed by Palestinian Authority. However, it is occupied by Israel. So Gaza and the West Bank face kind of separate sets of humanitarian needs. So Gaza, being blockaded, pretty much all of these needs listed on the left side are a direct result of the blockade and the constant violent conflicts with Israel. One thing I want to note is the staggering unemployment rate of 43%, which was from, that statistic was from 2016. And it's just continuing to increase as the economy declines due to the blockade. They can't import things, they can't, leave to find work, and so it really is just increasing the overall poverty rate. So in West Bank, like I said, they face kind of a separate set of needs for the most part. So they, being occupied by Israeli forces, are often subject to raids that Israelis will do in homes or neighborhoods, claiming that they are looking for wanted Palestinians, like either political figures or potential attackers. And a lot of the people who are found in the raids, they are unlawfully detained, sometimes subject to torture, and they are often denied due process of law. And then also aside from that, the Palestinians who live in the West Bank, especially in East Jerusalem, because it is such a desired location to live for many Jews, those Palestinians face a lot of harassment from both like the Israeli government and the Jewish settlers. And as more and more settlers are flocking to that area, even though it's considered illegal, that's just increasing the tensions even more and increasing the discrimination against Palestinians. So the UNRWA stands for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. And this organization was formed in response to the growing humanitarian needs due to the conflict, especially after the Arab-Israeli War that was a day after Israel was granted statehood. And so this organization was formed to specifically serve Palestinian refugees. And they obviously provide relief, through food, water, cash assistance, and providing materials for temporary shelters. But they are also dedicated to not just relief, but also development. And so on this slide are some of the programs that they have. And pretty much all of their programs are designed with the aim of empowering them, the Palestinians, and equipping them to be able to have a life of dignity, independence, self-sustainability. And so from what I can see, this organization does a really good job of incorporating, the individuals and the communities in the process, and encouraging them to, be as engaged as possible and take ownership and work together as communities to be able to use, the capacities, the skills that they have. So it seems like, all of the all of the interventions that I looked at have have been designed toward the end of promoting dignity and self-sustainability. And I wanted to end talking about peace building, just because, you know, this is an essential tool if there is to be lasting resolution between Palestine and Israel. Um, and so, just for an example of an organization that does this, is the Interreligious Coordinating Council in Israel, who was founded by Rabbi Dr. Ron Kronish. And he has been doing this for about 20 years. And it is essentially group discussion forums that includes both Israelites and Palestinians. And they usually have to commit to at least a few months, usually about a year. And so the forums are, they have 4 different kind of tiers that they go through. So the first one is just personal interaction, getting to know each other as individual human beings. And then the next is interreligious text-based learning, which I thought was really interesting. So that, many Palestinians are Muslim, and so they get to learn about Judaism, as a religion and as a culture. And then likewise, the Israelites get to learn about, the cultural and religious beliefs of the Palestinians. So I thought that was really interesting. They just get to learn more in depth, where the other is coming from. Next, they move to discussing the core issues of the conflict. And Dr. Ron Kronish said that this was a really valuable part because it seems to be what keeps people coming or coming back. Just being able to talk, openly and honestly about what is going on kind of in the midst of it. And then the last one is taking action separately and together. And I think this just really sums up, everything that we've been learning in this class. And I'm going to read this quote to end, just as a reflection, as an encouragement, and just, to give hope for this seemingly endless conflict. So he says, "It is not enough for us to learn and undergo personal transformation. As responsible members of society, we must take our learning to heart and create change. We are obligated to work for peace, to influence others, and to cause a ripple effect." So thanks for listening.